In 1138, a single castle held off an army of 40,000 men for 3 months. How is that even possible? Today, we're going deep into the ingenious world of medieval castle defense, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why these stone fortresses were the ultimate military machines of their era. But before we storm these walls together, smash that like button if you're ready to become a medieval warfare expert, and hit subscribe because we're building an army of history lovers here. And here's a challenge for you. I'm going to show you 12 defensive features that made castles nearly impossible to conquer. Keep count as we go, and drop your final number in the comments. The first person to get all 12 right wins a shout out in our next video. From secret passages that saved kings to walls that could survive cannon fire, we're about to uncover why medieval castles weren't just homes for royalty. They were the ultimate military machines. Let's start with a question that might surprise you. When did humans first start building castles? If you said the Middle Ages, you're only partially right. The concept of fortified homes goes back thousands of years, but the castles we think of today, they're the result of one crucial moment in history. Drop a comment right now. What do you think was the single most important invention that made medieval castles possible? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't stone. The answer is the stirrup. Yes, that simple piece of metal that helps you mount a horse. Here's why. Stirrups created heavy cavalry. Heavy cavalry needed supply bases. Supply bases needed protection, and protection meant castles. But early castles weren't the stone fortresses we imagine. The first Norman castles in England were built in just days using something called moat and bailey construction. Picture this. A huge dirt mound, that's your moat, with a wooden tower on top. At the bottom, a courtyard, the bailey, surrounded by a wooden fence. Now, if you're thinking that sounds pretty weak, you're absolutely right. Which brings us to our first defensive innovation, the shift to stone. But here's what's fascinating. They didn't just copy the wooden designs in stone. They completely reimagined what a fortress could be. And that reimagining started with one crucial realization about human psychology. Fear. The bigger and more imposing your castle looked, the less likely enemies were to attack it in the first place. Medieval builders understood that the best defense was making your enemy think twice before they even started fighting. But looking scary was just the beginning, because once attackers decided to lay siege, castles had to back up their intimidating appearance with genuine lethality. Before a single stone was laid, medieval castle builders had to answer one critical question. Where exactly do you put a castle? And the answer reveals the first layer of castle defense, strategic positioning. I want you to look at this image and tell me in the comments, why do you think they built this castle here specifically? This is Edinburgh Castle, built on an extinct volcano. Now, that might seem like an obvious choice. High ground equals advantage, right? But there's so much more strategy here than meets the eye. First, elevation gives you visibility. From up here, defenders could see enemies approaching from miles away. That's not just a tactical advantage, it's psychological warfare. Imagine you're an attacking army, and you know the enemy has been watching you march for 3 days. They know exactly how many men you have, what equipment you're carrying, probably what you had for breakfast. But the real genius of castle placement goes beyond just high equals good. Medieval builders chose locations that controlled something valuable. Look at this pattern. River crossings, trade routes, mountain passes, harbors. Every major castle was built to control a choke point, somewhere that people had to pass through. Because here's the thing about medieval economics. Controlling trade meant controlling wealth, and controlling wealth meant controlling power. Quick question. Are you Team Mountain Castle or Team River Castle? Let me know in the comments. But my personal favorite example of strategic placement is Conwy Castle in Wales. Edward Thirst didn't just build it on high ground, he positioned it so that at high tide, it's completely surrounded by water on 3 sides. It's like having a moat that fills itself twice a day. And here's a detail most people miss. Steep approaches weren't just about making it hard for enemies to climb up. They made it nearly impossible to bring siege weapons close enough to be effective. Try hauling a trebuchet up a 45-degree rocky slope while arrows are raining down on you. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. But even the perfect location meant nothing if you couldn't build walls that could actually stop an army. And medieval wall design, well, it's way more clever than you think. Pop quiz time. How thick do you think the walls of a medieval castle were? 1 foot? 3 feet? Try 15 to 20 feet thick in some cases. And every single inch was designed with one purpose, keeping you alive while your enemies die trying to get in. But before we dive into wall thickness, I want to know, what do you think was the biggest threat to castle walls? Battering rams? Catapults? Tunneling? Drop your guess in the comments. Medieval castle walls weren't just thick, they were smart. Look at this cross-section. You've got an outer layer of dressed stone, that's your smooth, fitted blocks. Then rubble and mortar fill. Then another inner layer of stone. This isn't just about thickness, it's about absorption. When a boulder from a trebuchet hits a wall, you want that energy to dissipate through the entire structure, not crack through in one spot. These walls were basically medieval shock absorbers. But here's where it gets really clever. See how the base of the wall slopes outward? That's called a batter, and it serves 3 brilliant purposes. First, it makes the foundation even thicker and harder to undermine. Second, anything dropped from above, rocks, boiling oil, whatever, bounces off at unpredictable angles into the attackers. Can you guess the third reason for the sloped base? First correct answer in the comments gets a heart. Third reason, deflection. Siege weapons were designed to hit vertical surfaces straight on. When your walls slope outward, projectiles hit at an angle and lose most of their impact force. It's basic physics being used as warfare strategy. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest innovations in castle design, the shift from square towers to round towers. Early Norman castles had square keeps, and they look impressive, but they had a fatal flaw. Corners. Every corner is a weak point where stress concentrates. Hit a square tower at the corner with enough force, and you can literally peel the wall apart. But round towers, the force distributes evenly around the entire circumference. No weak points, no corners to exploit. And speaking of innovations, look at Caerphilly Castle in Wales. Those walls aren't just thick, they're angled. See how they lean slightly inward? This creates what engineers call an enfilading fire zone. Defenders can shoot along the length of the wall, catching attackers in crossfire with no cover. If you're enjoying these engineering secrets, make sure you're subscribed because we've got entire episodes planned on medieval siege weapons, armor design, and battlefield tactics. But walls were just the beginning, because the real genius of castle defense was what happened when enemies actually tried to get through those walls. If castle walls were designed to keep enemies out, then gatehouses were designed to kill anyone stupid enough to try getting in. And I'm not exaggerating. Medieval gatehouses were basically elaborate death traps disguised as doorways. Look at this gatehouse from above. Do you see what I see? It's not just one gate, it's a series of obstacles, each one deadlier than the last. Medieval builders called this defense in depth, but I call it medieval sadism at its finest. I'm going to walk you through attacking this gatehouse step by step. Count how many different ways it's trying to kill you, and drop that number in the comments. Step 1. You approach the gatehouse. Immediately, you're under fire from arrow loops in the towers on either side. But that's just the welcome committee. Step 2. The portcullis. This isn't just a gate, it's a massive iron grate designed to slam down and trap you in a confined space. And here's the diabolical part. There are usually two portcullises, one after the other. Picture this nightmare scenario. You charge through the first portcullis and it drops behind you. Now you're trapped in a stone corridor with the second portcullis still ahead of you. Medieval castle designers had a word for this space. They called it the killing ground. Because look up. See those holes in the ceiling? Those are murder holes. And yes, that's their actual historical name. Defenders could drop rocks, pour boiling water, or shoot arrows straight down at anyone trapped between the gates. What's the most terrifying castle defensive feature so far? Gatehouse death traps or those massive walls? Let me know. But wait, there's more. Many gatehouses had hidden passages called sally ports. While you're focused on breaking down the main gate, defenders could emerge from secret doors behind you. You're not just attacking a fortification, you're walking into a three-dimensional puzzle designed to kill you. And even if you somehow made it past the portcullises and survived the murder holes, you still had to deal with the actual doors. These weren't just big wooden barriers, they were layered defenses. First, massive oak planks, then iron reinforcement, then a complex barring system that distributed the door's weight across the entire gate structure. Look at these hinges. They're not just functional, they're defensive. See how they're recessed into the stone? That's so attackers can't just remove the pins and take the door off. Every single detail was thought through by people whose lives depended on these defenses working. The historical records tell us that most castle sieges ended at the gatehouse. Not because it was impossible to break through, but because it was so expensive in terms of casualties that armies would give up and look for easier targets. But let's say you're exceptionally determined, well-equipped, and lucky enough to actually breach the gatehouse. Congratulations, you've just entered the most dangerous part of the entire castle. Welcome to the Bailey, the castle's courtyard, and the place where medieval siege tactics came to die. Because here's what most people don't realize. Getting inside the outer walls wasn't the end of the siege. It was just the beginning of an even deadlier game. The moment you break through that gatehouse, you find yourself in what military historians call a fire sack. You're surrounded on all sides by walls lined with defenders. You have no cover, and every single architectural feature around you is designed to channel you into killing zones. Before we explore this medieval murder maze, hit that like button if you're starting to understand why castle sieges took months or even years to resolve. But the Bailey wasn't just an empty courtyard. It was a complex ecosystem of buildings, each serving multiple purposes. You've got stables, workshops, storage buildings, barracks, and here's the clever part, they're all positioned strategically. See how these buildings create natural corridors? That's intentional. Defenders want to control exactly where attackers can go, funneling them into predetermined zones where crossfire is most effective. And look at these wall walks. The pathways along the top of the walls. They're not just for patrolling. They're interconnected highways that let defenders move quickly to wherever they're needed most. While you're stumbling around in the Bailey, trying to figure out where to attack next, defenders are repositioning above you with perfect coordination. Question for the comments. If you were attacking this Bailey, what would be your strategy? Storm the keep directly, or try to take out the defensive positions first? But here's something that separates good castles from great castles: water supply. This well isn't just convenient, it's survival. Many sieges were won not by breaking walls, but by waiting for defenders to run out of water. A castle with its own water source could hold out indefinitely. And speaking of supplies, look at these storage areas built into the walls themselves. Food, weapons, arrows, everything a garrison needed was distributed throughout the Bailey in multiple locations. Even if attackers captured part of the courtyard, defenders could continue fighting from supplied positions. But the real genius of Bailey design is the crossfire. From any position in this courtyard, you're visible from at least 3 different defensive positions. Medieval archers called this enfilading fire, shooting along the length of enemy formations where every arrow has a chance to hit multiple targets. Historical accounts describe Bailey battles as absolute chaos. Smoke from fires, arrows flying from every direction, attackers trying to use captured buildings as cover while defenders dropped stones from above. It was 3-dimensional warfare in a confined space. But even if you somehow fought your way across the Bailey and eliminated all the outer defenses, you still faced the ultimate challenge, the keep itself. And medieval keeps, they were in a league of their own. This is the keep, the castle's final fortress and the place where medieval defensive architecture reached its absolute peak. If gatehouses were death traps, then keeps were designed to be impregnable refuges where a handful of defenders could hold off an army. But keeps weren't just tall, thick towers, they were vertical fortresses, with every floor designed as a separate defensive position. And here's what's brilliant. Even if attackers captured the lower levels, defenders could continue fighting from above. I want you to imagine you're a medieval lord, and your castle is under siege. Everything else has fallen, and you're making your last stand in the keep. What's the first thing you do? Drop your survival strategy in the comments. Let's start with getting into the keep, because medieval builders made even that as difficult as possible. See this entrance? It's not at ground level. It's on the second floor, accessible only by external stairs that can be destroyed in an emergency. These stairs are wooden, not stone. Why? Because wood can be burned or demolished quickly, leaving the keep entrance completely inaccessible. It's like pulling up the drawbridge on a vertical castle. But let's say you somehow make it inside. Now you face the spiral staircase, and this is where medieval psychology gets really devious. These stairs spiral clockwise going up. Why does that matter? Because most people are right-handed, including most soldiers. When you're fighting your way up a clockwise spiral, your sword arm is constantly hitting the central column. But defenders fighting down have their sword arms free with full range of motion. It's a built-in advantage for the home team. Are you left-handed or right-handed? If you're left-handed, congratulations. You'd actually have an advantage attacking medieval keeps. Let me know in the comments. Each floor of the keep was designed to be held independently. These walls aren't just thick on the outside, they're thick between floors too. Even if attackers controlled the floor below you, they'd have to break through several feet of stone to reach the next level. And look at these arrow loops. They're not just in the exterior walls, they're positioned to cover the internal spaces too. Defenders on upper floors could shoot down at attackers who had captured lower levels. But here's what makes keeps really special. They weren't just military structures. They were also homes. This great hall served triple duty. It was a dining room, a court of law, and in emergencies, a barracks for the entire garrison. And food storage. Keeps were designed to support their entire population for months. Not just basic survival rations, but proper meals that would maintain morale during long sieges. Because here's something medieval commanders understood. Hungry, demoralized defenders don't fight as well. The roof of the keep was the final defensive position, and it was equipped accordingly. Mangonels, small catapults that could be operated by just a few people. Stockpiles of rocks and arrows, and often signal fires that could call for help from allied castles or armies. But all of these fixed defenses, walls, gates, keeps, they were just one part of the defensive equation. Because the most innovative castle defenses were the ones that could move, adapt, and surprise attackers. So far, we've talked about passive defenses, walls, gates, strategic positioning. But medieval castles didn't just sit there and take punishment. They fought back with an arsenal of weapons and tactics that would make modern military engineers jealous. Let's start with siege engines. Yes, attackers had trebuchets and catapults, but so did defenders. And defensive siege engines had one massive advantage: they didn't have to be portable. What do you think was more effective, attacking siege engines or defending ones? Make your case in the comments. Defensive trebuchets could be built bigger, more powerful, and more accurate because they never had to move. Some defensive engines were so large they were essentially part of the castle's architecture, built into the walls themselves. And they didn't just throw rocks. Medieval defenders got creative with their ammunition. Fire pots filled with Greek fire, medieval napalm that burned even on water, diseased animal carcasses to spread plague among attackers, even captured enemy weapons thrown back at them. But the weapon most associated with castle defense is boiling oil, right? Well, here's a surprise. Boiling oil was actually pretty rare. It was expensive, and you could achieve the same effect with boiling water, which was cheap and always available. What defenders really used was heated sand. Sounds harmless? Try getting superheated sand inside your armor. It burns, it's impossible to remove quickly, and it causes panic in enemy formations. What's the most creative defensive weapon you can think of using only medieval technology? Most creative answer gets pinned. But the most effective active defense wasn't weapons. It was surprise attacks through sally ports. These are small, hidden gates that let defenders emerge behind enemy lines unexpectedly. Picture this scenario. You're besieging a castle. You've set up your camp, your siege engines, your supply lines. Everything's organized. Then at 3 a.m., castle defenders emerge from a hidden gate you didn't even know existed and attack your camp from behind. Sally ports weren't just simple doors. They were often disguised as decoration, built into cliff faces, or hidden in seemingly solid walls. Some were even underwater passages that let defenders emerge from rivers or moats. And let's talk about psychological warfare, because medieval defenders were masters of mind games, displaying captured enemy banners, making noise all night to prevent attackers from sleeping, even staged surrenders that were actually traps. Communication was another active defense. Signal fires that could summon help from miles away. Messenger pigeons that could carry intelligence through enemy lines. Even coded messages hidden in apparently innocent items thrown over the walls. But of all the active defenses, there's one that was so effective, so game-changing, that it revolutionized siege warfare forever. And it wasn't a weapon, it was water. This is Bodiam Castle, and it represents the pinnacle of medieval water defense. That's not just a decorative moat, it's a complex water management system that turns the entire castle into an island fortress. But building effective water defenses was incredibly complex engineering. You couldn't just dig a ditch and hope for rain. Medieval engineers had to understand hydrology, soil composition, seasonal water levels, and hydraulic engineering. Before we dive deeper into water defenses, let me ask, do you think moats were primarily for defense, or were there other purposes? Drop your theories in the comments. Look at this moat construction. It's not just a hole in the ground, it's a carefully engineered system with clay lining to prevent drainage, stone reinforcement to prevent erosion, and controlled inlets and outlets to manage water levels. And moats came in different varieties. Wet moats like this one were full of water year-round. Dry moats were basically massive ditches that made it impossible to bring siege engines close to walls. And tidal moats, like the one at Conwy Castle, filled and emptied with the tide. Here's why water defenses were so effective. Medieval siege warfare depended on getting big engines close to walls. Trebuchets, battering rams, siege towers, they all needed solid level ground. A moat meant these weapons couldn't get within effective range. But effective moats weren't just deep water. They contained hidden obstacles, sharpened stakes just below the surface, designed to impale anyone trying to swim or wade across. Some moats even had underwater chains that could be raised to block boats. If you were attacking a castle with a moat, what would be your strategy? Try to drain it, build bridges, or find another approach entirely? And then there's the drawbridge, probably the most iconic castle feature. But medieval drawbridges weren't like the simple hinged bridges we see in movies. They were complex mechanical systems that required multiple people to operate. Some drawbridges lifted straight up, others tilted forward to create additional barriers. The most advanced ones had counterweight systems that made them faster to raise in emergencies. Many water-defended castles also had water gates, entrances that allowed boats to enter the moat but could be sealed with portcullises that dropped below the waterline. This gave defenders naval access while maintaining security. But here's a challenge medieval defenders faced. What happens to your moat defense in winter when it freezes? Some castles had systems to break up ice. Others relied on currents to prevent freezing. The most clever ones used the ice as an additional defense by making the surface unpredictable and dangerous to cross. And maintaining a moat was a full-time job. You needed to prevent silting, manage aquatic plants, control mosquito breeding, and ensure water quality. Some castles even stocked their moats with fish, a food source that also helped maintain the ecosystem. We're coming to the end of our deep dive into castle defenses. If you've made it this far, you're definitely part of our medieval warfare expert community. Make sure you're subscribed because next week we're exploring siege engines from the attacker's perspective. So let's recap our count. How many defensive features did we cover? We had strategic positioning, massive walls, round towers, gatehouse death traps, Bailey crossfire zones, keep vertical defenses, active defensive weapons, sally ports, psychological warfare, and water defenses. That's way more than the 12 I originally challenged you to count. But here's my final question for you. If you could design the ultimate medieval castle using everything we've learned today, what would be your top 3 defensive priorities? Drop your dream castle defense plan in the comments.